So we're going to be talking about our experience of reading the book, our experience of design, and we're going to start with people who have read the book, and then we will go to everybody else. The format is I'm just going to have a conversation with anybody who wants to talk about their experience of design or their experience of reading the book. There is no particular agenda about particular topics or anything like that. You just bring up anything that you want to talk about. So if you'd like to talk to me about the book, go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll talk to as many people as we can, and then we'll go from there. You can either type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll take different people in different order just to kind of mix things up. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to talk about the book. So far we have got Charlie and Joe. Who else would like to talk about the book? Okay, Jean, very nice, very nice. Anybody else wants to start off? Okay, let's start with Jing, because Jing is an architect. You know what, let's start with Becky, because Becky we've not heard from Becky yet. So let's start with Becky. Is that okay, Becky? Or would you prefer that somebody else go first?
I'm more of a responder than an initiator.
Okay, all right. So you'll go second or third. So let's start with Jing. So Jing, you have been practicing architecture for a long, long time. What is this book doing for you?
Yeah, I think it's actually helping to clarify a lot of things. One is understand why architects love their job, even though in America, architects are not high-paid job. In China, actually, they're a very high-paid job. They're like comparable to a computer. Here, all the people I know, they change their job to computer because they're paid much more. So, but it's funny, like everybody loves their job, and there's a dentist in the architecture discussion forum. There's a guy changed to dentist, then come back to discuss in the architect group. They said, why you come here? I think part of the reason because this book, it clarified, because architect, you use right and your left brain. Basically, you develop both of the brain. So you're happier because it's more balanced. And in your practice, you use your both logic thinking and imagination. So you feel more fulfilled. So I think I understand why that's happening, Another thing is, recently I listened to this Sadhguru, and it just makes so much sense, everything connect. And it's actually make me to, this book also too mentioned about making this design bigger than just building physical design. It's more about designing your life, designing your mindset, the balance of mind, body, spirit, and energy. It's quite interesting, because I have this design mind since I was a child, because I want to be an architect because I love drawing. I draw all the time. Actually, Inktober really helped me to bring that passion back. I draw every day now with different prompt. It's so much fun. And also I'm good with physics. I saw the combination is architecture. So since middle school, I decided to study architecture. So I only applied for architecture for the college and end up in the planning department for whatever reason. And luckily I changed it back with a lot of, so in my life, there are a lot of obstacles, but I found if I stick with my goal, it always work out, even though there's a detour in the middle, but it's always work out. And I love what I do. And because most people change their job, there are very few Chinese speaking architects in Seattle. That's why I have a lot of clients now. So everything works out. So I always amazed by how people pay me to do the things. I have fun. I just like, so I tell my kids, don't worry about money. Just do what you love. If you can provide service for other people, they will pay you. That's how it works. So you have to provide value. But so anyway, so I think all this come together. We have to design our life. My friend said, "You are so lucky. You're doing the things you love." I said, "It's not luck because it's designed by me. I have always thinking this way, and it works. And there's a lot of obstacles you don't see, so you only see the result." I think if we have the design in our mind in every aspect of our life, with our effort, we will show the result. So that's every aspect of life. And with this side guru, it makes so much sense. We can control our mind, we can design our life, we can be a creator of the world, ourselves, and all the things around us will manifest. It's amazing. I'm just starting listen to him, and just like everything makes so much sense. I'm very excited.
Wonderful, wonderful. So folks, what I'm going to do is that I will just ask this one question first to everybody. What are they getting from the book? So that way, because there are a number of people here who are planning to read the book, who have not actually started to read the book. So this would serve as a good kind of starting point for many people. So let me go to Maritza next. Maritza, what are you getting from the book so far?
Hi. So what I'm getting from this book is it's almost like it's showing you different methodologies for change, like change strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like that. I have to admit that, and all the hype from CJ, I had thought that it would be a much more difficult read. I find it not as difficult as I thought it would be. And I really feel that it's almost like empowering. I don't think that that's the goal of the book, is to empower people, but it's almost empowering when it's to see in this very almost pragmatic way concepts that are outlined, kind of showing you things that you have already been thinking that you wanted to do, or the manner in which you wanted to arrange your life already is kind of laid out for you in this book. And basically it's telling you, you can grab the reins here. And that's quite enticing.
Wonderful. So that's very intriguing observation, that it is empowering, because it explicates things that you're thinking about, you had in kind of an implicit form. He makes them explicit.
Yes.
Wonderful. So now let's go with Joe. Joe, what are you getting from the book so far?
There are a few things that I'm getting from the book. I mean, I see this clear delineation between science and what they're calling design. And I'm really seeing it more in the area of where they're talking about the real and the and what is true, and this idea of like the scientific method and the limitations of the scientific method around that. It's kind of, you always think about analysis and deductive reasoning and then inductive reasoning as a way of actually taking apart things and actually seeing the world, and you think that that's an objective approach, but it is limiting in what you can create out of that, because you are ignoring something. Now, I never really thought about that, what that something was. That's what I'm kind of getting more in tune with the book. The idea of what is real. Mm-hmm. And so
can I say something? Like whenever I've looked at really great scientists, I find that they are far more integrated beings than not so great scientists. So for example,
right,
when you look at the work, when you read Einstein talking about science, or when you look at Richard Feynman talking about science, they are full of intuition, approximate things, hunches, then they are making it explicit, they are testing it out. So they are involved in all those 4 phases of using your mind fully. It is the people who are taking the products of science, who do not know how to actually make those products, and are trying to apply them, and just apply them and not do anything beyond that, is what people think of as the science approach. But I think the science approach, the true scientists, when you actually look at true scientists, they're doing a lot more. And they have, I think, a much greater affinity towards this right brain and left brain. Jing talked about the right brain and the left brain. So people automatically think of science is mostly left brain. But if you look at people like Einstein, they would say, no, what are you talking about? You have to have imagination. You have to have ability to visualize things. And that's very much of a right brain function. And then you have to be able to explicate it and then test these going back and forth. So in a true scientist culture, I think there is tremendous sympathy between that and what he's talking about in the design way. It is only when people just look at products of science and say, okay, how do I use it now, that you have that kind of a division. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's a fantastic point. Just to build on that is the when you really think about purpose and intention, like, and that's the idea of the real is like, okay, what's your, and I have thought about it in terms of what is a unique value proposition, and that's in a particular instance, and that's the way I'm kind of relating what we've been learning over the past 2 weeks is a unique value proposition is something that is real, and it's a little bit more outside of the scientific method, and it gets you to the ideal.
Let me add one more thing, because we have been looking at Jacob Branowski, and when he talks about scientists, he says, he thinks of scientists as being a sculptor. Now that's a very astonishing thing of saying sculptor. Why a sculptor? Because what he's saying is that it is the connection between the brain and the hand which produces value. So that entire loop of grasping something through your senses, conceptualizing it, planning what you need to do, and actually doing it, and taking a feedback from that. That's what a sculptor does, and that's what a scientist does. So in a true form, when you look at scientists at their best, artists at their best, they're actually very similar to each other. So what we are looking at, what people call scientists, is like a straw man that is missing pieces of the entire cycle. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and it's the transformation process that this book really kind of talks about, that you're just talking about. How do you bring something into being that is, that is desirable for everyone? And I still think actually one of the best questions was actually Mike's when he asked about the idea between balancing requirements and costs and the constraints of the ideal, like what you desire. And coming up with that balance is something, and we haven't gotten to that answer, and maybe he will answer it at some point. But I also found that's something I've been thinking about as well, quite a bit more than normally. The final point I'll just make without going on too long was the actually, I'm trying to think of my final point right now because I didn't think of anything to say.
That's fine. You can come back to it.
Yeah, it was basically about judgment. It was about the idea of judgment. I'm looking forward to learning more about judgment because that to me is still a little bit abstract. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. I want to follow up on one thing that you said, and that is design is about bringing something new into life, into the world. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to actually improve the world. You're trying to improve your life. You're trying to improve the world. You're trying to improve the community in which you are acting. And that's what your aim is. So your aim is not passively accepting something. It is not about kind of just grasping something. It is not about just planning something, but actually making life better. And that's what the idea of the ultimate particular is, that you are actually, all of that process ends up in creating the ultimate particular, something specific, something which is real, which captures the ideal, which is true in the sense that it is conforming with everything that you know about the world. So that idea of ultimate particular. And that's the chapter that we are going to study on Monday. Next up is going to be Charlie, Becky, and Evanik. Charlie, what are you getting from the book?
Well, I've been reading the chapter for next Monday on systems, systemics. I forget what the title.
No,
of the
no,
chapter.
the next for Mondays, it's ultimate particular.
Ultimate particular. Oh, okay. Well, anyway, it's still part of the book. Okay.
Yes.
And I've been finding that chapter to be particularly useful for me because I'm kind of a right brain dominant sort of person, but I've spent a lot of time studying science and mathematics, and so I understand the mindset of taking pieces apart and then putting them together, to defining a piece by its properties. Okay, and then once you understand that piece, then you can start to put them together like a Lego thing. Okay. And that's just the opposite way of systems thinking. In systems thinking, you take the whole as your starting point, okay, and then you bring out parts of the system that are relevant to the issue that you're addressing to yourself too. But the starting point is the whole thing, okay, and the main point is that there's a tendency for people to when they're doing it, starting off with the parts and looking at their properties and then saying, okay, well, this piece belongs to that piece because of their properties. And then you build stuff up, that there's a tendency to forget that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. When you start off with a systems point of view, that's not an issue. That's kind of like obvious, okay? Because when you're starting from a systems point of view, you're starting with everything, okay, the whole. And then the next step is that you take parts out that seem to be meaningful for the thing that you're trying to do. And so I'll have to disagree with you, Shrikant, about what you said about scientists, particularly physical scientists, because what happened after Newton was that they went into this whole idea of objects and properties, and they looked at atoms, and they looked at the equations of motion for a point mass, and then from that they developed the various forms of mathematical systems called the Hamiltonian and the Lagrangian, and it's all kind of complicated mathematics, but it's all starting off with that idea of parts that are well defined, and from that you grew up a system. And most of physical science used to be, okay, now with quantum field theory and so on, they're starting to expand their way of thinking to be more holistic. But there's still a lot of people that are stuck back in the 19th century way of thinking about, billiard balls, bumping up against each other, and thinking about building things up, from the bottom up. And in particular, Einstein and Paul Dirac were autistic. Okay, and one of the properties of a person who's autistic is that they don't do well in social situations. Okay, they're not able to, they don't look at a person straight in the eyes when they're talking to them, for instance. Okay, that's a characteristic of a person with autism. There's Asperger's. I mean, it's autism spectrum disorder, if you want to get really technical about it. And a lot of people who go into physical sciences are, the usual pejorative term is nerd. Okay. And so one of the characteristics of people who do social studies or arts and humanities, as it's usually called, he mentions that with the C.P. Snow and the two cultures, I have this graph that I put together from data from the GRE data. Okay, looking at the average GRE scores for people going into different specialties, and if you look at the people who are going into physics, chemistry, computer science, mathematics, and stuff like that, they're way up on the top on the math scores, but they're kind of not so good on the verbal scores. Okay, and then if you look at someone like philosophy, they're number one when it comes to verbal, but their math scores are not so hot. Okay, so they don't do math very well, and so that's part of the reason that there's this separation of that cultural separation, that people are really good with language, which is really the carrier of humanity. A lot of if you use language in an artful way, that it's for instance, Dirac derided poetry. He said that that's an example of where you take a simple idea and make it unnecessarily complicated. He was seriously autistic. Okay, and so but my understanding is what Harold Nelson is saying is that in design, the whole is really the whole. It includes all of humanity, and human nature. Being a human being is a big part of design. Okay, that you have this sense of what it means to be human, and so when I'm doing this project and I'm working on music, I try to imagine, conceptualize how it developed, over time, going back to species prior to humans. Okay, that there's just this relationship that exists between structured sound. Okay, and it's necessary for survival. You'll be able to recognize a predator or something like that. But it's kind of like it gets built into a living system to have this awareness of sound, and so that. And then there's attractive sound, sounds that you feel attracted to, and then there's sounds that you're afraid of, and so on. So that it's all part of that emotional part of being a human being, is that relationship between the experience, the being in the world with sound. Okay, and so for me, that's kind of what I'm really glad that I read this chapter by mistake, instead of the ultimate real. Because it kind of really justifies my prejudice, I guess you could say, that I think it's better to think that way first. When you're going into something, you should have this big picture idea, but you should also have to have the ability to make things happen. So my background in mathematics and physics and stuff is going to be helpful, I think, in order to get done what I want to do. But anyway, that's for me is my big takeaway at this point in time for the book. But the more I read it, the more I like it.
Thank you, Charlie. Next up is Becky. Becky, what are you getting from the book so far? I'm going to ask you questions so you can answer them. First question, what are you getting from the book so far?
I am new to design, completely new. Like I've never heard about it until this. So I'm coming at it with new perspective, but a lot of it does resonate with me because as Jean has said, it's something that perhaps she knew from her childhood, but I think I kind of feel that way too, because from my younger years, I loved art. But later on, just for practicality, I kind of moved into mathematics and really built that up. And I find myself like struggling back and forth between the two kinds of thinking, where I've bounced a lot between the types of jobs I've had, to the point where right now I enjoy it very much because I have the autonomy to create something that doesn't exist right now within my company, but then I still have that practical piece, the concrete piece, to bring back that idea of, well, here's your vision, this is what you want, how practical is it? You're iterating through. This is exactly what I've been doing for most of my my adult years without knowing it. So reading it has been really enlightening to me, but also I'm seeing things that I probably wouldn't have. It's exactly what you said. It's like it's in your mind, but then on paper it's been externalized, and you can better understand it. And I can learn a lot. And as Marisa said, it's like you're empowered by it once you have that conceptualized. So that's I'm gaining a lot from it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think that's what the reason I chose this book is that it actually integrates many things that we've been talking about, and it deals with it in an integrated fashion. So for example, we've been talking about Jung's cognitive functions. So this is all about using all the 4 functions and knowing what their uses are and respecting all of them and using them in concert, instead of just taking one one angle and going with it. So there is a lot of connections that this book has. Second thing is that it is, go ahead, Becky.
Oh, you mentioned Jung's cognitive functions. I mean, when I was reading this, I was thinking exactly that. It's like, oh, wait a minute. It's like NI is like speaking so clearly through. It's like, what do you want? And the introverted intuition. It's like, what do you want? And then being able to make it into reality with your like extroverted sensing and your extroverted thinking. It's like gain the way to pay it forward into reality. So it's exactly what you're saying. It's when I was reading this, I was like, oh, Jung and his cognitive functions and how to train that, because it's like the other thing was like if you don't know what you want, that's mostly the extroverted intuition. It's like all the possibilities, and it might be hard to come down to that one thing. Because there's so many possibilities. What's your probability of something being successful? It's harder to pinpoint, but it can be trained. So I thought that was interesting.
Absolutely. And if you have time, I have a full mapping between what Harold Nelson is saying and what Carl Jung is saying about the functions. So maybe I can talk about it at the end of the meetup. Thank you, Becky. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, what I've been taking from this book is like I've been using it as a toolkit, and I think it could be used as a toolkit to design your life or to design what you want to put out into the world. So I've been using it just to figure that out, and I think if you don't know what that is, which I don't exactly know what that is, I want to put out to the world or how I want to design my life, I've been using it as a toolkit to figure that out and to find out. And I think you can also use it almost as like a tool case. So like all the other stuff that you learn, like, we learn from Louis Sullivan, we learn from Tao Te Ching, we learn from the Bible, we can all put it into this toolkit. And I see the design way as being like this big tool case where it helps you use all these tools to design what you want to put out into the world and, figure out what you want in your life and what you want to put out in the world, and to see what's working in your life and what is not working in your life. So I think it's just a really good toolkit to learn from. And I think it's a hard book in the sense like the concepts are or challenging to understand, especially since I don't have like a background in design. But I think the challenge is good because it challenges me to not only learn the concepts, but to learn how to apply the concepts, which is like, to me, the most important thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanique. I really love the term that you use. What do you want to put out into the world? I think simply asking of that question is a profound thing, because it focuses your mind. It says, okay, what matters to you? And what are you going for? And it does. So that's one point. I think that is one huge point. The second point you made is about the toolkit. This is actually giving you a toolkit of making these things explicit, of saying, there is preparation involved, there is skills involved, there is effects of what you're doing involved that you have to pay attention to and judge what is good effect, what's a bad effect. It is it is very profound. So I think the toolkit actually captures it. And what it is going to do is that it is going to actually challenge our ideas. On one hand, some of the ideas that we have implicit will become explicit, as Becky was saying, as Maritza is saying. Second thing, which will also, I think, end up happening for many people, you will notice that you're thinking something in a wrong way, in an unnecessarily conflicting way. And you will say, oh, there is a way of thinking about this, which is and. So it doesn't have to be right brain or left brain, but right brain and left brain in this particular way and in this particular configuration. For the last chapter, the idea of compositional assembly, I think, was profound. And it exactly makes this point that compositional assembly is different elements, all of which you need, all of which have individual characteristics, but they operate as a whole. And you're making sure that they operate as a whole. So that's excellent. Thank you. Rupali, welcome. I wanted to ask you about design. I don't know whether you've started reading the book, but you have a lot of experience with design. I don't know whether you want to talk about design. Are you ready to talk about, can I ask you about how you think about design?
Sure. I have not yet started reading the book, but I can certainly talk about design. And so...
let me introduce you a little bit. So Rupali is my friend of 23 years, I think 24 years. I count by her son's birthday. It was his 24th birthday, so I've known her for 23 years. So she's an architect. So she's trained as an architect, and she has a school, and she's very explicitly designing the education of children using the Montessori method and building up her own school. So she has like these two large experiences in design. So I wanted to ask her the question of what is design based on her own experience. And as she reads the book, she will have more. But before she starts reading the book, I wanted to ask her what design is, and hopefully we'll get something from that. So yes, Rupali, what's design?
So to me, design is creating solutions to make your environment better. And my school is called Think, Explore, Create. The idea is that you think about what's around you, what you need, what you want things to be in their best form. And then you explore the tools around you. And using those tools, you create the environment that you desire. So to me, that's what design is. It's from imagination, taking what is and what can be.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, Shay, go ahead. What are you getting from the book?
Okay, so I have not read the book yet. However, I have my own perspective. So I agree basically with everyone, whatever everyone is saying. However, I think that design is not only limited to bringing something new to the world, like in a general picture. To me, it is also about bringing something new to our own world as individuals. We all are designers in our own way. Like, I'm going to take a very unusual example. I did not grow up speaking English since it's not my primary language, but I have a clear picture about how I want to improve my English. So the way I put the words together based on the vocabulary that I have so far, it is to me a form of design. Of course, I have not created that design. I did not create any language, but the way I apply it into my world in order to express myself, in order to communicate, it is a form of design. So to summarize maybe the question, I will say that design is bringing beauty and enhancement to any type of world.
Excellent. Shay, I think the author of this book and almost everybody here is going to fully agree with you. Design is an individual quest, and it is a social quest. So this point about how the individual quest and the social quest are related is also a really fascinating point, because what we do is that we take things that other people have developed, like language, like English. I did not make English. It was other people who developed it, but then I master it and I learn to use it just like you're doing in your own way. And in so doing, we add something. It is an individual creation. At the same time, that individual creation happens in a social context. So there is an impact that you have on others through your action. So it is individual and social at the same time. And this dance of how it actually works is a core concept, because most people think of it as individuals versus the community, but it's really kind of individual and the community. Only when individuals within the community thrive, the community thrives. And you can't really thrive as an individual without actually contributing something to the community. So there is a back and forth. And he has this really fascinating concept of service, where you are, as Jing was pointing out right in the beginning, you're doing something that you love because you love it. And in so doing, you produce something that is valuable to other people, and they will pay you for it. And it's a complete win-win. You're doing something that you love, and other people are valuing that because you love it, you have put in all your heart and soul and mind into it, and you produce something of great value, not only to yourself, but to others. So that's a fantastic point. Thank you. Thank you for making that. All right. Anybody else wants to comment? Now it's open to anybody who wants to talk about design. You're welcome to ask a question. This is a far more flexible format that we have. Firstly, if anybody is reading a book and has not talked about it, go ahead and type exclamation mark. If you'd like to put some questions on the table. So I'm going to give a chance for people to comment first, and then I'm going to ask people for questions, and let's collect the questions, and we will discuss them at leisure. Instead of doing a lightning round, we'll discuss them at leisure. So go ahead and type exclamation mark, whether you want to make a comment or whether you want to put a question on the table. All right, who'd like to go first? Joe.
So I don't know if I'm supposed to ask a question or if I'm supposed to make a comment.
Let's do one thing. Let's do one thing. I always appreciate you, rising to the challenge, but let's, and being the first one to get things started. Ambika has not spoken before, so let's go to Ambika and then we'll come to you.
Okay.
Okay. Ambika, go ahead.
Well, I was happy to let go with Joe first, and I could respond. So I haven't read the book fully yet. But what I wanted to share was my own experience, because I agree, we are always designing something. And as a creative person, I'm reflecting again on my own creative process. We have big homework for Yasuhiko's class, and my creative process has me stewing for days and weeks until my body hurts, and then I'm like, boom, I start, getting it out there. But it's also possible to look at one question or one image and be stirred to write something. So I think we are always designing, even if we are not physically designing. It's how we think and how those thoughts make us, and how we cancel and recreate and cancel and recreate. We make a decision, then we change our minds. it is constant.
What does design mean to you?
What does design mean to you? What does design to me means, my goodness, there's so many things it means. It's a process of giving form to something, of creating meaning. And I think that we're here for something, for some purpose. So when we create something, we're giving it form and shape because it has meaning. And when we manifest it in 3D, then it takes on another meaning, and then it carries on by somebody else's perception. The reader's response to writing, for example. You give an assignment to a student, you write what comes to you. And so we're creating these webs of meaning. And yes, sometimes it can be deceptive. And that's where I want to pull back and say, okay, but are you sure this is what you mean? Yeah, so it's so much.
Wonderful. Let me follow up on one of the points that you made, which Becky also made. This is the question of manifestation. See, what happens is that we have a very rich internal life, yes. But when we express it outwardly, something magical happens. Because firstly, and I've formed it, I've noticed it most when I write things or when I draw things. What it does is that it puts whatever you're thinking inside, outside. Once you have put it outside, you can actually reflect on it. You can say, did I get it right? Am I missing something? Can something else be added? And by putting it outside, your ability to interact with what is inside of you goes up because it is outside as an object. Yes. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that you can interact with other people by speaking out these words. These words are out there and other people can start interacting with them, and they can bring their own creativity to bear on that and transform that. And that's what these discussions are all about. Instead of thinking about things, just thinking about it internally, by speaking it out, other people can pick up on it, other people can interact with it and go from that. So I think that manifestation is a very powerful point. Wonderful. So let's go to Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to comment on the idea of the individual and the collective as well, because I think that is a really important point. When we were talking about this in terms of Louis Sullivan with form follows function the other day, the idea that somebody is letting the forms dictate what their life is. And that to me is something that is the opposite of design, when the forms are actually dictating what you see and how you react. Whereas if you are able to then flip that and see the functions and then create new forms, I think that's an example of design. And so the idea of, and you said it so beautifully, I don't know how many weeks ago now, but it was the idea of almost the inverted self.
Yes.
Where the individual is, and I thought about this in a lot of different ways. I thought about it in terms of, say, somebody like a coal miner. The job itself, and I don't know
Let me do one thing. Can I explain it? Can I build
please,
on what you've said? And then we'll come to the example.
Okay.
The core principle of Louis Sullivan is form follows function. Function is a living function. It's who you are. And we make things which is a reflection of who we are. We make things in order to manifest this function, to implement the function outside of us. And those forms created in this form, this way, actually help the function to go on. Now, what happens? But this is an act of tremendous love for yourself and towards the world. It is a very positive view of the world. First, it is a view saying that you are a being capable of creating, designing, and building. It's a tremendous act of confidence in yourself. And this world is a wonderful place where it is worth putting in all the work needed to make something, make the world better. That is a natural human being. When Louis Sullivan talks about the inverted self, it is the case when you take forms as primary and thereby depreciate and actually smother and kill functions. So it is the idea that forms, or let's say the traditions or ways of doing things that other people have done as given, and then you try to shape the functions with the forms. So whenever the forms come first, now look at it from a psychological point of view. Instead of love of yourself, you have actually a fear. You're saying, I'm afraid I can't do anything. You're also afraid of things that have been produced. You're saying, I better hold on to the things that have been produced because I don't know how they are produced. Let me hold on to them for dear life. As opposed to saying that I can make it better. And moment you have, so it's the distinction between motivation by love versus motivation by fear. That is what Louis Sullivan talks about as the inverted self. Saying that man is a designing animal is a very profound statement about nature of human beings. It is liberating, and it is a tremendous creative act. It shows tremendous confidence in yourself, in other human beings. So that's another thing. It's a confidence in yourself, other human beings, and the world all together. The opposite of that is fear of yourself, fear of other human beings. You're trying to protect yourself from other people, and fear of losing everything that is there. So that is the difference between form follows function or form kills function. Go ahead, Joe.
So, I think, and I've been able to apply this to so many different, maybe I won't use the coal miner. I'll just use somebody that's unwilling to change in their job, and the function of their job is not servicing the function that it actually needs. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, then all of a sudden they're hanging on to their job. They're just, I'm going to do this, despite the fact it's not servicing the function of what it's necessary to do. And when you do that, you're saying, I don't want to change. And so change is a really big part of this. Is the idea then is that you're hanging on to those forms selfishly because you're no longer being of service to what you're actually supposed to do. So if you were actually changing and being willing to bring a new thing into being or change the process, it's an act of love because it's a act of service that you're following the actual function of what you're supposed to be doing. So this is, I see this in work all the time. People hang on to their jobs out, they do things the way because that's the way they've always been done, because they don't want to change. But changing is not only an act of, it would be not only an act for the customer, but it's an act for you as well, because you're actually challenging yourself. And those same type of challenges actually manifest themselves in relationships and how we design our lives. So this is like a very important concept. It's the idea that as soon as the forms dictate, and this is, this also goes directly to the collective and the individual, that they're both the same thing. Because if the function is a service, it's working for the collective. It's not working for the individual. If the function is for the individual, actually, it's the reverse. It's not working for the collective, and it's working against it. You're working actually against yourself and the collective. So that I'm no longer worried about the customer. I'm just worried about doing things the way I used to do them. And this is where you can kind of even come into the ideas of creation and destruction, and in the idea of independent action. How do you achieve independent action with John Boyd? It applies across the board. So individual, yeah, I might be saying. I may be saying it incorrectly, but anyway.
No, this is great. Thank you, Joe. That's amazing. I'm going to give a chance for people who have not spoken to speak first, and we will go through everybody, but just in order so that everybody gets to put their first thoughts out. So it's going to be Shane Murray, followed by David and Jing. Shane Murray.
Yes, hi. So I really appreciated what you said about essentially that which precedes design, which is this notion of self-love and of service. And those to me seems to be the very things that prevent people from participating in design. And yet that seems to be the question that needs to be answered, is how do you prepare individuals to be willing to engage and to participate in design? So is there any sense of how you bring one to that state of readiness, to trust in the world, to agree to participate, to not sit back? Those are the questions that I have for myself that I've yet to answer. And I think the majority of us have those questions as well.
Wonderful, beautiful questions. We'll try to answer them through this entire course of the book, because it is, I mean, what the idea of service that he's talking about is exactly that, because it is saying that I am going to initiate and I am going to bring something in the world to make world better. And how do you create the psychological prerequisite for that? It's a very deep question. Thank you. Next up is David, followed by Kevin. David, go ahead.
So what it struck me as I was reading the book, was able to kind of reflect back a lot of events that occurred throughout my career. And because I was involved in a lot of design projects, but what was interesting is some of the things that I did intuitively, I guess you could say, or learned by trial and error through experience over time, they kind of were coming together in this book. And I think one thing that, now I was involved in programs or projects that were a lot more technical in nature. So they would have incorporated a lot of the philosophy of the comprehensivism, because it involved very broad dynamics, very broad base understanding for the projects or the programs and the design to be implemented effectively. But the keys that I see, and I kind of am picking up some of it from the book, is leadership in the project or in the design process is key to success. Also, being able to understand the level of detail required at the appropriate phase of the design. Because in the early stages, and I saw programs fail because in early stages, too much attention was placed on details and they were missing the bigger picture, and were bogging down almost in that analysis by paralysis or paralysis by analysis, because they were so focused on minute details and were not able to actually put the entire picture together. And so one of the things that I'm picking up, maybe correctly or incorrectly, that a lot of people don't maybe appreciate, that I eventually did, is the design process is extraordinarily dynamic. requires a lot of flexibility and a lot of open-mindedness. And the success is highly dependent on the design team. And it really is important that it is a team, that they can cooperate, that they respect one another's viewpoints, and can challenge people or can challenge each other to understand their conviction on a point. But one thing that I'll go back to is success a lot of times will depend upon the leadership or the collective leadership, if you will. And at some stages in the process, it's sometimes necessary to make decisions. And what you basically have to do is just make an assumption, establish a ground rules, establish a design criteria, so to speak, even if it's at a general level, so that the program can move forward, and then allow the design to evolve and fill the details in. But as the details are filled in, you need to be willing to give up when things don't match or don't work out the way you thought they were going to be, and replace them with new information. So I guess that's kind of what I'm pulling from this book, because as I'm reading it, I'm actually reflecting back on experiences. And I can read a paragraph and reflect back on an experience I had where what the description that I just read was relevant to something that I experienced. So I'm finding the book very interesting from that perspective. I wish I had read it about 20 years ago, but it's better to read it now, at least.
Wonderful. David, that was amazing. I'm going to try to put it in my own words as partly as a way of capture, because I think you captured something really big. What you're saying is that, you grasp all of these things intuitively, many of these things intuitively, but this book is helping you explicate those things. And the core idea, the way I heard you, is that the core idea is that of leadership, where you're actually taking responsibility for the entire project, the entire team, the entire process. And then you're creating a culture in the group where people are free enough to exercise their own judgment, at the same time willing to provide corrective feedback to each other and learn from each other. There are stages of design where you have to remain away from the details in some cases and then dive into details, so that those stages are going to change when the level. The importance of making decisions at different points, even when you do not know whether those are going to be the right decisions, and then be open to correction. And it is an art of making those decisions, standing by them when you have to, and letting go of them when you have to, and do that while accepting this tremendous dynamism across people, across the scale at which you are working, and across all the specific details that you will keep changing and correcting as you go along. So just beautifully put. Thank you. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Jean and Ambika. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Stanka. I briefly scanned the book last time, then today I try again. I find 3 words that's very important for me to learn. So, designer, designing, process. I would assume everyone is a designer for your own life, for your personal, family, career, then integrate with the community, social society. Being a designer is about doing design. So being a designer is not about, let's say, predetermine the process. It is instead about designing a process. So it's if one thing didn't match a continuous improvement process, because the environment time is changed. So you have to use adaptive approach to do it. Therefore, the design is like from books said, design learning is same thing as designing the designer. The question then becomes, how does one design an excellent design and learning process? A designer's character evolves a snail-like pace. Yes, I'm concluding the designer must use more adaptive approach, use skills appropriate and measure your life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that. Next up is going to be Jing, followed by Ambika. Jing.
Yeah, quite interesting. So I want to share two things that, just from earlier conversation. One is what Shirkan, you mentioned about the inside and outside. I found this quite interesting, because it's quite interesting how when I draw, or when I write, the outcome is always surprised me. Sometimes when I read my previous writing, I can't even believe I read those. I think it's kind of interesting how sometimes things in our mind is so abstract. When we come down, it's always surprise us what we can produce. Same as drawing, you start with this, Inktober, you have this prompt, then you come up with this idea, then they always come out so much better. So, and also the outside, inside, that's kind of inside feedback, you bring it outside, how you feedback yourself. Another is outside feedback, as a designer, it's so important to get feedbacks. That's how we improve. Because when we work with clients, they can only give feedback based on their needs, but they cannot give you professional feedback. That's why I started this international designer group, with friends, so we can actually critique each other's work. I think that's so important to get professional feedbacks, which is very lacking for the small business. You really need that. And it's funny, like we have this architecture group in Seattle. Everybody only talking about like building code, permitting. I was like, come on, we are not the architect to deal with permitting and like code. The reason we become architect because we love design. Nobody talk about design, just crazy. So I don't understand. I don't understand why. But anyway, so I create a smaller group. We can actually feedback to each other. And another thing, what David mentioned is quite, his experience observation is so accurate, because that's exactly how I feel. Because when it's kind of funny when we were doing project in China, because most people, the client, are not professional. So they want to see renderings at very early stage. So when we design something, it's like, oh, they can't understand your design. So make a rendering of the lobby. It's just early stage, and you have to render this air, air conditioning outlet. It's crazy. It's like, it's about concept. Same as when we start drawing. When you draw a person, you can't start with eyes and eyebrow. You have to do this body structure, like do this squares, round shapes. So you make sure their structure is right. Then you get more into details. You can't go and draw a beautiful eyes, then in the wrong location. So then you waste all your, exactly the same as what he mentioned. You can't get into detail. You have to set up the bigger structure. Then you get into detail. You come back, then you go in. So that's
I want to follow up on what you said. This thing about the eyes, okay, and drawing. There is this book that I really like called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, whose essential message is that get the overall pattern first, and then you can go into the details. And if you do it in that order, actually things look very, very good. Whereas if you go detail and then you basically get lost. It's the same, it's like if you start with details, then you have no way of actually coming to the whole with that. So you have to start with the whole.
Yeah, I think that's why I think drawing training, I did drawing training when I was in high school, pencil rendering. I think that's helped me so much in every aspect of my life, because it's all about like big picture detail. It's all like back and forth. I think that applies in every aspect of our life, actually, as a design, for design.
Wonderful. I just want to say that, when my niece was visiting me when she was, I think, 8 or so. She came and stayed with me for a week. And we always always like to do projects with her. So I said, okay, let's try to draw something. So she said, I don't know how to draw. She said, okay, let's draw faces. Now, the faces, the thing about faces is that our eyes are actually very good at noticing things about faces. So if you want to actually draw something, try to draw a face, because you're going to get feedback of what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, far more than if you're trying to draw a table. Okay, your mind will not rebel when you draw a poor table, but it will rebel when you draw a poor face. Okay, so I used the book, Drawing on the Right, and she was saying, I don't think I can do, but within a week, she was actually drawing better than me in some ways. So it's a very powerful idea of just starting with the whole, and then you use your native ability to do what you can with it. Wonderful. Next up is Ambika, Evanik, and Maritza. Ambika.
So I wanted to respond to a few things that I've heard from these wonderful creators. Kevin brought up the idea of time. And I wanted to speak to that in terms of, you imagine something and you're going to create something, or you're going to write a poem, or whatever it is, make a drawing. That time aspect of when it's in your mind, and then when you actually put it in form, what changes? And then when you put it away and get back to it, to return to it, again, something changes. And that's such a delightful process, because you look at it and say, oh my God, that word needs to be here rather than where it was. Or I need a different word completely because this is too cliched. And so that time, time is not linear for some of us. It's always fluid. It's all of this.
Let me comment on this one thing. We did a full meetup. A friend of mine, Rob Krasinski, he teaches writing. And one of his core observations is that you have two faculties. You have the analytical faculty and you have a creative faculty. And most of the times, each of them interferes with the other. So neither of them can really operate well. If you actually let one of the faculties run fully, then stop, take a break, and then let the other faculty run fully, and then take a break and bring back the first faculty, that's a beautiful way of producing something, because it's a question of using the time. Like, for example, when you're writing something, you say, okay, what do I want to say? What are the key points? And you do bullet points. This is completely analytical. Then you can let your creative mind go hog wild and write things out. Okay, and there you do not interfere with the analytical mind. You just write it out. Then you keep it aside, and then you come back to it as if somebody else has written it. Does this make sense? And you are analytically going through it, improving the structure of it. Then you're coming back to it and say, oh, this doesn't flow at all. Make it flow. So you switch between these two faculties. Go ahead, Ambika.
I taught composition for 30 years and I just quit because I couldn't do it anymore. But it is such a lovely process when you get into it, because that's metacognition. And I always use that from day one with my students. Metacognition, it's to keep it alive. And then you start reflecting on your own life and a system of values. And so that was how I did this. However, back to time, and then what Jing said about first drawing and then giving it different form. Sometimes I paint without drawing. I just say, this is what I want to do. And the form speaks to you. The colors speak to you. The design shows itself. And that's, these two different processes. It's just fascinating. At the same time, when we I really think the left and right are working together all the time, because you make a comment, you write something down, and then you say, oh, how lovely, that's your aesthetic side. And so they're working always like this. I don't think there's a clear demarcation ever. So wonderful. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Ambika. Next up is Evanik. Evanik, go ahead.
Yeah, Sharika, I wanted to go back to like a few conversations ago, where you were talking about Louis Sullivan and you were talking about the inverted human being. And you said something about an inverted human being holds on to what is produced. I wanted to know if you could say a little more about that.
Sure.
Like, it was a very interesting thought.
Sure. So what happens is that, we are creators and we create things. Moment you say that, okay, that is it, I'm going to hold on to what I have created or what somebody else has created, your ability to create dies, because you're saying holding on to something that is already there, already manifested, is what I'm going to do. And my life depends on that. So you lose the capacity to produce. Usually you can see it in a dramatic way in terms of, for example, Jacob Branowski talks about this. The creative process is like a child. In a traditional culture, a child is shown the ideal of a grown-up as being the full, complete thing that they should aspire to, and that's it. So there is a ceiling placed in front of a child. Moment that happens, once you reach there, you're just trying to hold on to that. You stop growing. And as a human being, when you stop growing, you begin to die. So actually, there is nothing like holding on, because everything that has been produced is decaying. So there is creative energy needed to actually even to maintain things. So the moment you say, okay, enough, I have learned everything, I don't have any curiosity anymore, you start to decay. So that's what it is. And then its consequences in social context are even worse. This is what happens inside you. But between people start saying, oh, I better protect what we have. This other person might take it away. So you look at all human interaction as a win-lose interaction, because all things of value are things that have already been created, and either this person gets it or that person gets it. It forgets that we are creative beings. We are able to create more. So instead of working together in a win-win way to produce something new, you keep, you restrict yourself so that you become actually fearful of yourself and of other people. And it produces a very, very bad social consequence as well. Does that help?
Yeah, it really does. And another thing that you were saying is when you were talking about confidence and how they're human beings, like, I get what that is, but it's also very difficult. And I remember going back to the Jordan Peterson meetup on the Bible series, and particularly on trust. And I remember, I forget who said it, but someone said it in that meetup, that is not trust so much in that the other person may hurt me, because you can't control that, but it's trust that I'm going to be okay no matter what, which is like, it's a great concept, and I agree with it. But like, you know how it says it's easy to say, but it's hard to do in reality. Like, I guess the question becomes, like, how do you balance it? Like, how do you protect yourself, but at the same time don't close off other people? Or can you do that? Or do you just have to take the risk?
Wow. I mean, that's a profound question. It's like, I don't know how to answer it. Well, I mean, for me, the best thing that I've seen is actually from a novel called Fountainhead, where the hero says something very, very simple. He says, it's a pain that goes only up to a point. So yes, you can feel pain, you can have defeats, you can have all kinds of things, but if it doesn't reach all the way down to the core, you have something at the core from which you can act again, no matter what happened to you. And that confidence, in Indian philosophy or Indian religion, it's the idea of Atma. In the Bible, it is the idea that you have a soul, that, and that is yours and yours, and you No matter what happens, you have it. And that is the place from which you can grow again. So those kind of concepts, this concept of soul in the Bible, concept of Atma, or the fictional, portrayal, I'm saying that there is a point, the pain reaches only up to a point. So there is something deep within you from which you can act, no matter what happens. And once you have that point, no matter what is happening, you know that you can go, you can grow from there. All right.
Thank you. Yep.
Thanks. Next up is going to be Maritza, followed by Jeff. Maritza.
So I don't exactly know anymore where this train of thought originated. I think it might have been something Joe said, but so when I started reading The Ultimate Particular in preparation for next Monday, I decided to go back and reread the composing and connecting chapter when I was only halfway through The Ultimate Particular. The reason being is that I wanted to dive more into the idea of the particular ideal and the particular real. And here today, someone mentioned the immersion versus immersion, and that made me think of the hero's journey. And the party, and that's what we were discussing with the compositional assembly. And I kind of wrote down notes and scribbled different drawings on the concept of the fact that what the authors here are calling the party, they're calling it like the aha, as it were, and it's defined as the intersection of the subconscious uncontrolled mind and the conscious controlled mind. And you had mentioned, and I think Charlie mentioned, that the concept of the right brain versus left brain, and how here to be, the designers, you want to find a way to corral both of them, because it's not a either or question. And I'm fascinated by the idea that it's that intersection is where we enter into the design process phase, where we can take the ideal and bring it into the real. And we're told that the emergence phase begins at immersion and ends with innovation. And it made me think of what we went through when we're talking about art. Our discussions are in art, where we were talking about how art is the concretization of the ideal, right? It brings our innermost values into, it brings it into the real. And so and then I know somebody mentioned the Fountainhead, and a couple other folks mentioned Louis Sullivan. And so I don't want to add another into the mix, but this is what it made me think of, the idea. So Ayn Rand was trying to explain why art was so important, and not just important, necessary in our lives, in our search to be, kind of like our best selves. And what she was saying was that, art is the concretization. And that's actually literally the same words that are used here. And it was something that I had read in the Ultimate Particular that made me go back and reconsider that. So looking at, art as kind of like the end product, the design, because so I myself, I don't create sculptures, but I would imagine that the process thinking about the process would lend itself very well to helping to identify or to maybe cement for ourselves the concept of concretizing the real from the ideal, like that moment of inspiration, or that like that aha moment. That's the guiding inner principle that we're now going to have to reach into and pull out. And we have to walk with that to create something real. And that's the design. And it's interesting because, I mean, we, all of us at some point have done that. You have to, I mean, we're not, most of us still 5. So we have at some point in our life had to do that process. And the idea of there being a subconscious component really makes me feel better about not having understood that this is what I was doing. Because it's like, yeah, you didn't know what you were doing, but you're walking through it anyway. You have no choice, because so long as you have a subconscious aspect to your mind, and we can all agree, hopefully, that all of us has this unconscious aspect to our mind, as long as that exists, you already have what you need within you to get at the starting point. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of beautiful to me, just to realize.
Wonderful. So I want to follow up on 2 points that you made. One is this point about immersion producing the party. And the second one was about art. So the first point, I think, is crucial, because what he's saying is that, you know, I'll use various people's terms. So I'll use, for example, Louis Sullivan's terms. He's saying life began to break in upon him. So letting life break in upon you is the starting point. That is immersion. If you don't do that, there is no source from which anything can come. You have to be open to taking in things. Second part, you can use the concept of Carl Jung, of intuition. It is the intuition of yours being able to take this entire right brain and see patterns in things that you know. So you're letting your pattern matching ability, the intuitive ability of being able to see a pattern which is not explicit. You're trying to put together that. So it's the operation of intuition, of breaking in from outside, which actually creates the base from which this party emerges. Party is basically the seed from this ground. And you need the ground. The richer the ground is, the more amazing the parties are going to be. Party is something that you can see, that this is the seed that I have, that I am going to grow from. And the design is growth of this further. But there is this precondition, preparing of ground, that is there in all creative activity, from which these different seeds come. So that was one point. The second point was on art. When Ayn Rand talks about concretizing of metaphysics, concretizing of things, in some ways that is a narrower concept than the concept of art as it existed long time ago. So for example, Greeks regarded everything that you do is art. Of you use your entire concept of what life should be in order to walk, in order to move, in order to make anything, in order to speak. All of these were forms of art. And the concept of design that he's using is similar to the older Greek concept. What has happened is that in modern times, the concept of art has gotten narrowed to mostly to fine art. But this concept of design is actually identical to the concept of art, except it is the larger version of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's exactly the way I see it. Hers is just an example of what it is. It's funny. Her use of art is a concretization of his concept of the party, as it were. One thing I do want to point out, Shrikant, as you mentioned about the ground, something interesting there is that if we're looking at the analogy of the seed, it's very important to realize that while we are preparing the ground, how the ground is considered ideal or ready differs from seed to seed. And I think that that perfectly aligns with the admonition that I've seen a few times now in the book, reminding us that the goal of design culture is not to find that one perfect solution.
Yes, excellent. Next up is Becky, followed by Jeff, and then Margarita. Becky.
So what you said before about fear and tradition and how that really stifles that design process, like triggered something in my thought. And I might be completely wrong because, like I said, I'm really new to design, but it made me think of going back to Carl Jung, the introverted sensing. And for the introverting sensing dominance and auxiliary, they are the SJs, and they're the ones that really preserve the traditions, and they stick with what is tried and true, what's been done over and over again. And going back to the idea of fear, it's that comfort level, and that being so high up on the stack that really prevents them from moving outside. And so and so that was something that came up into my thoughts. But also because introverted sensing is on the same axis as extroverted intuition, when you have it so high up in your first and second stack, your creativity, intuition is going to be lower. And so it kind of then tied to the idea of form follows function. Well, your function is more of that abstract idea, and your form is that concrete. And so SJs are extremely concrete, and versus like that intuition part. So that kind of also added together with just things gluing, because like I'm starting to understand a little bit more, at least from my perspective, of like, well, what makes someone more prone to tradition and less inclined for a design mindset. But fortunately, this is all nature inclination, and we can still learn design through nurture, which is an awesome thing. But also still going back to the introverted sensing of like just that memory over and over. And Maritza bringing up the hero's journey. It's like, what prevents someone from venturing out into the unknown? It's that fear. It's the fear of and the need for what's known, and that's memory. That's your introverted sensing. So another thing that that just stops someone from going out. But because going back to the point that I said with introverted sensing being on the same axis as extroverted intuition, that means that your introverted intuition is not even in your stack. It's going to be in your shadow. And so whenever I think of design, it's like, you know what you want. And I think his term for it was desiderata.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you want and you trailblaze through. It's like a laser beam. And if that's in your shadow, it's like, it's going to be a lot harder to access. So these are just all thoughts that kind of glued just from your mention of fear and tradition and stifling that design.
Wonderful, Becky. That was amazing. I'm going to put it in my own words. and because there are many people here who will not be familiar with these terms. See, SI, introverted sensation, is basically memory. You're basically dominated by what you remember, and you're trying to hold on to what you remember, and that being your primary way of dealing with the world. And if you are like that, then the exact opposite of that is what is called extroverted intuition, which means that you're trying to see what is possible. It's the extroverted intuition is seeing the possibilities that are, so you're actually exploring, and you're seeing exploration. So it's like remembering the past versus exploration of the possibilities of the future. And if you're starting with that, the general pattern here is that the extroverted, I don't know how to put it. You know what? We'll deal with this fully at the end of this one. I'll go ahead and explicate that fully. But it's a fantastic point. You're talking mostly about the axis, S and N axis. I just want to point out that there is an axis which is perpendicular to that. So what happens is that the natural progression is that you see possibilities with your intuition, and then you actually name it, actually capture it with your T, with your thinking of saying, this is the seed. Like when you have the seed, the ground is prepared by the intuition. The seed is actually word. And then you develop that seed into the SE, into the actual concrete thing that you make based on the thought that you had. And that actually transforms the world, and it will cause all kinds of feelings. So there is the other two axes also that are operative, but we'll talk about that. Next up is going to be Jeff, followed by Margarita. Jeff.
Hi, Shrikant. Hi, everyone. Shrikant, would you say that wonderful quote from Louis Sullivan again about the world breaking in?
Yes. So
the full quote.
Yes,
those parts of it.
Yes, the full quote is that this is at the beginning of his autobiography. He says, life began to break in upon him, and a continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny.
A little bit like breathing in and breathing out,
Yes.
A little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Maritza, I want to go back to what you said about this is not about discovering the single right answer. And I think that that's a very profound statement, Maritza, because I think that there's a very strong motivation in humans to not only search for the single right answer, but when we come up with an answer that makes sense to us, at least for a while, because everything that makes sense to us ultimately shifts. We want to defend that conclusion that that is the single right answer, and we will defend it. Sometimes, to the end. And that defense of the single right answer, I think, is sometimes related to the prizing of form over function. That functions actually do evolve. That in terms of what we think we're trying to do here, and spaceship Earth did not come with a manual, and so exactly what we think we're doing here is a little bit up for debate. And but design culture really is about those things. It is about change. It's and I take very seriously the beginning, of this book, that he says what he's really about is trying to promote and establish some of the facets of a design culture. And it's interesting to me that he didn't use the word system or process there. He spoke of it as a design culture that's motivated by a desire to serve. And I think that that's very different. It sort of gets, it's tempting to actually start to pursue it as a somewhat rigid process or system rather than a culture of exploring how to best serve. And in that sense, there are these, in every respect here, this is really a process that is guided by the best questions we can bring to the endeavor. The best questions win. And so what's a good question, right? So a good question is, for example, so what's happening right now? What do we think might happen next? And then what do we think is going to happen in the future? You know, and any design orientation wants to be responsive to what's going on now, you know, the reality of the moment, maybe what we think is going to happen next, so that we might in some way put together approaches that are a springboard to accomplishing something that we think is wonderful to accomplish next. And then our sense of it, okay, well, what do we think this might look like 5, 10, 20 years from now? And how do we actually use that as a criteria for thinking about and talking about and considering what it is that we want to do? It's not just responding to the immediate. It's not just a reaction. It's not even the short term, which is essential. It's actually a little bit having an eye towards the long term. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. And that brings me to the second kind of example of what's a good question. Well, another good question is, or another way to think of it, is questions that are adequately open, that don't presume a very specific, tangible, this is the only right way answer, but also that are adequately focused. And whether it's the 4 dimensions there of the tetrad or whatever it might be, adequately focused and adequately open. And one of the reasons why this being adequately open and adequately focused is useful is, we've talked about this before, things we think we know, things we think we don't know, and then things we really just don't know that we don't know. Like, I don't know about the rest of you, but I didn't really see the pandemic coming. So it's fascinating actually when you really go deep into that. The place where you can really get hurt with regard to this is things you think you know, but you're wrong. And that's actually where we get ourselves into trouble. But nonetheless, this process of being a creator, I think that we are creators and we are co-creators. And I'm a creator for me, and I may be a creator in order to serve you. And we're co-creators with each other for us. And all of those things are true. It's not either or, they're all true. Then I'll finish up here that there's a dimension to leadership. I'll give you sort of a funny picture, but I think it's really useful. Okay. They asked a very great golfer from the 50s, how tightly should you hold the golf club when you swing it? And he gave a great answer. He said, well, think of it like you're holding a small bird. You want to hold that small bird firm enough so it doesn't get away, but not so tightly that you kill the bird.
Wonderful.
And that's how tightly you should hold a golf club. And leadership is a process of modeling the way and enabling others to act and challenging assumptions and encouraging the heart. It's all those kinds of things. And it's all about, facilitating a process of imagining and envisioning and identifying values and norms and thinking about following a process that makes sense, from observing reality to setting goals and what you expect to get from them, and considering your approaches and deliberate and decide and experiment and learn.
Thank you.
But I would just say that the key part about leadership is, what do you do with disagreements? Because that's really where the rubber hits the road with regard to leadership, as well as encouraging people to come up with the best questions.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Rupali, followed by Margarita. Rupali, go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. So, just as I'm listening to everybody, here's something that I feel about design. And I want to share where this thought comes from. So I believe that design is a natural instinct in humans. And it is the desire to make things better, to see something and say, okay, what can be better in this? And the joy of seeing that creation for a bigger goal is what I think design is. And today we had a trip to the farm. So our school is connected with the farm, and we take our students to the farm to kind of learn all the work out, to be outdoors. And when you were talking about Louis Sullivan's autobiography, it reminded me of the time when he built a dam and constructed it just completely, as a child's play. So we took our students today to the farm, and there's a man-made pond over there, and there's a little stream that flows in from the pond downhill. And the children noticed that the stream was clogged. And instinctively, they just jumped in and started cleaning out, and they started making shapes around to let the water flow. And I was thinking, this is what design is. It's, they see a problem, they solve it, they have a lot of joy doing it. And there's work involved, there's mental, physical work. And then they created something better. They were at it for an hour or so, and then they were just satisfied with what they had done. And then in their mind, they had solved a big problem of, letting the stream flow its natural course. So I think that is design. It's so natural to humans. Even children can do it. So with that, I will say good night to everybody. It has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Rupali. Next up is going to be Margarita. Margarita, go ahead.
Shrikant, don't you think Ambika should go first before me?
No, the rule I have is that people who have not spoken much get to speak first.
Okay.
That way we can get as many voices on the table first. Go ahead.
Okay. I think I have 2 points. One is about, I agree with I read the prelude just now. I think I agree that humans have this tendency to be a designer. We just need to be conscious about it. In fact, I think it's related to the WHO mental health conception that one should actualize its potential. I think in part of this is the ability, the potential to create, to design something. And I believe this will be an ongoing process. Once you create something, you create something, then you need to know whether I'm creating, whether I really know about this thing that I'm creating. So this ontological and epistemological dance will make human will be like an ongoing creator or designer, which is interesting. But I don't think we learned that so far from education. I think most of the time we put more regulation rules that inhibit people actually to become a designer, more of a constructor, not a designer. And the second thing, my background is, I know that this has been studied in cognitive psychology, so maybe they use different terms. In terms of creation, creative process, I think we can approach it by 2 ways. One is, and then I think we've been discussing this, but I'm using the term from psychology. One is the insight process, the aha moment. That is like sudden change from unconscious to conscious that you know the answer. And second is the analytical approach, the incremental learning, more knowledge, then you solve the first problem, and then you know better, then you can solve the real problem. And actually, it's all in psychology. We know it's been developed, it's influenced by our priming, cognitive priming. What kind of information happening in our lifetime, in our environment, in our framework. So if you're exposed with ideas about the past and the future, it will induce more abstract thinking. Then you are likely to produce insightful, like the aha insight. things. But if you're working more on practical, current, like clerical tasks, that you're more likely to develop analytical thinking. And sometimes you cannot choose your environment. Your way of solving problems, to create things, to design things, is actually not always the thing that you can choose. However, we do have ability to recreate or to restructure our priming. So for example, nowadays I work more with statistics, which makes me more like in the moment, and I find it a bit difficult to read to think abstract. So I need to deal with, I need to read more novels, poetry, discussion about poems, religion. That helps me to be somewhat able to think about insightful things that I still need to solve my problem. So yeah, that's my comments.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Margarita. Next up is going to be Jing, Charlie, and Ambika. Jing.
Oh, I actually want to talk about what Avanique mentioned about, how trusting, then how you deal with people, trusting people. I actually want to share my experience. So I think it's, I found it's very important to trust people until they prove otherwise. So just like in American, they think everybody is not guilty until they prove they're guilty. In Chinese, it's just the opposite. They think everybody is guilty until they prove they're not guilty. The culture, I think it's kind of open culture versus closed culture. My experience is like, you give them the opportunity, but we have the intuition, like we know, we trust people are good. And just like the sad guru mentioned, there's no bad or good people. Just like people, then they're in very bad condition, then they act very badly. So I think I actually see that way. Then they know, so you can understand where people come from. So I deal with different clients. Now I kind of create this intuition. And also I don't want to deal with people who are not honest, not trustworthy. I don't want to waste my time to deal with those people, because once you deal with one, they will refer all their friends. So you will like in this wrong cycle. So I would rather take the client in a more positive cycle, like people are trustworthy and they work together, we create this nice, and they will refer their friend, and their friend are similar to them. So I have stopped some of the project in the middle, and the structure engineers, I really respect, they walk away from that project. And I said, I actually at that time I was take a risk to take the project because I want to get experience. But in the middle of the project, I realized it's the wrong decision, because I don't have to suffer through this to get experience. I could get my experience in a much better way. So I think it's important to trust people and build this. It's kind of like natural environment. We create our own natural environment in our work, in our life. We don't want to surround ourselves with toxic people. And unless we have built very strong, so we can save them in some way. Until then, I think we want to surround us with this healthy, ecological environment, both in our family, friend, and work, so we can actually build out our strengths. So maybe one day we're stronger enough so we can help add more people to change their environment. So that's what I want to share.
Wonderful. Excellent points. Thank you. Next up is going to be Charlie, Ambika, and Joe. Charlie.
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on what you had said earlier about love and its importance in everything really. Recently, not recently, excuse me, around 2012, Stephen Hawking did an interview with Larry, the talk show guy. His name is slipping my mind for some dumb reason. But anyway, he made a statement that if humans basically self-annihilate, it will be because of stupidity and greed. And I don't think that's quite the best way to look at it. My tendency is to think of of courage and honesty, okay, as being the critical things that are and the thing is that when you think about love, love is kind of like the opposite of fear. Love can't really exist when there's fear, and so if you're filled with fear, you cut things off. You want to form a boundary. You want to form a wall, okay, a wall between you and the rest of the world, or a wall between you and the people that you feel are like you and the rest of the world. And in the most extreme version, it's like a person becomes totally selfish, and they make a virtue of selfishness, and the most epitome of love is, for me, is the mother-child relationship. It's where there's almost like a fusion between the mother and the child. And if someone's lucky enough, fortunate enough to form what's called a secure attachment, where there's this back and forth of a relationship between the mother and the child, it's the first experience of love for hopefully for all people, but some people have unfortunate family backgrounds, but in the case of a secure attachment, that's a foundation for a person to be able to be a full human being, is to be able to love, okay, and that ability to love comes really from the mother-child relationship, and so it's I see that as this idea of having an open mind, okay, of being receptive, of being willing to look at reality as it is, comes from that strong foundation of being able to love, of loving the universe. Okay, you love the universe, and you see nature is Mother Nature, and so on. So it's kind of like, you would not want to hurt your mother. Okay, you would not want to kill your mother. Okay, if you love your mother. And in the same sense, you wouldn't want to hurt nature, so that a lot of these ideas are natural extensions of that feeling of love, and it's kind of selfless, because you think in terms of service to all, okay, rather than domination and control and all of those other types of things that are encouraged by selfishness, okay, and greed, and all those kinds of things, where you're so afraid, and the only way you can see rationally to deal with that fear is to dominate and control, and so it's not surprising to me that the best design comes from within the environment of a loving person, okay, a person who's able to love, so I just kind of wanted to throw in a little bit of that psychology stuff that I think is kind of reaffirms, basically that fundamental intuition.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Ambika, followed by Joe. Ambika.
So this is becoming more and more intense, and as we go deeper and deeper with all of these different points of view, which really form the whole, so it's really beautiful. I wanted to say something about how you worked with your niece, because that's how sometimes I worked my classes. Would give them 3 essays to write over the semester, but not grade them. I said, on the last day, I said, okay, put it together. Now you get to illustrate this. And go, what? I've never drawn. So that was exciting, because it helps to bring in different capacities and different skills to augment the other one. And some people had breakthroughs, and this gal do a masterpiece for the first time in her life. So that was amazing. So that plus, I think somebody else said something, I'm forgetting exactly now what. It's just become so beautiful that I'm feeling we should be creating something right now. What next are we going to do? And yes, it's always tempered by love and affection for each other. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambika. The point that Harold Nelson makes very beautifully is that he has got text and he has got these little diagrams. And he's saying that is moving from the acquisitive eye to the reflecting eye, and back and forth as we are going along. It's all about, being a good designer is all about engaging both these faculties all the time, switching between them as you need to. Next up is Joe. Joe, my friend, I'm so sorry. There are so many people who want to talk. and I want to give them a chance to talk first.
And it was more than fair. I got my fair share. So
Go ahead.
it is. No, this has been fantastic. In fact, I feel like I'm kind of bringing it back to something that way back, but it was something that both, it's kind of a combination of what David and Jeff had spoken about, and this idea of what, having the right questions and knowing the right questions to ask, and knowing when to actually pivot, which is an important part of actually letting go as well. That's what David, I was, forgive me if I'm not capturing exactly what you were saying, but there's different points in a project where you have to go a different direction. And then being able to ask the questions, it's kind of very similar to understanding the general, the particular, and then the ultimate particular. It's you're understanding where to ask, to what degree do you need to ask questions in order to get the information that you need to get in order to make a decision. And this is a very important point in the book, because it talks about this as far as leadership is concerned, is that, and in a way, think about it in terms of meetup, the way you organize your meetups. You keep them at a level that we can all participate. You know the level that we need to go to. You can go to a level of granularity if you have to, but you have to be able to balance those two. And it's important in design where you're not only asking the right questions, but you're probing to the right level. And I think that that's where we kind of get to this idea when we start to understand what actions we should be taking. That's the ultimate particular that's associated with the actions that we should be taking. But the probing questions prior to that are absolutely important, and that is part of leadership. And I think that that's really coming out in this book as well. So it's, and I think that 52 Living Ideas is actually an example of that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. All right. So I want to, again, it's 11 o'clock. So I want to stop this meetup, but I want to talk to you about, I want to talk to anybody who wants to talk about this idea of the 4-part division that we have, that we've been using to look at this book. This is the, this is based on Marshall McLuhan's ideas of tetrad, but I have combined it now with 4 different kinds of ideas. So you're welcome to stay, or you're welcome to leave, whatever you would like. Let me go ahead and share a diagram with you. Okay, this is my latest version of it. We were talking about 4 different things happening. So let's talk about it from the perspective of psychological functions. So there are actually 4 different thinkers here. The one at the top, the first one is Louis Sullivan. That's function, form, breaking in, and breaking out. These are the 4 concepts from him. The second one, these are all in chronological order of their birth, or their actual creation of this idea. Actually, that's what I've done. The second one is Carl Jung. And there we have got intuition, thinking, sensing, and feeling. The third one is John Boyd. That's about the OODA loop. That's observe, orient, decide. I prefer design instead of decide, and act. And the last one is Marshall McLuhan. Talks about overextend, retrieve, enhance, and displace. Okay, so what happens is that this, I think of it as a cycle. These are actually operative at the same time on anything, and you can put anything that you want in that white square, and you can look at what it is from these 4 different perspectives. It's a very powerful way of understanding something. But I want to draw out the pattern first, what happens, Maritza was talking about the immersion leading to the party. Okay, so there we are talking about the immersion, the intuition, observation, taking in of things, being open to nature. This is the yellow part, which is the source, which is actually it's the most unconscious or subconscious of our faculties. This is where we put together, our brain is a very large pattern matcher. This is mostly kind of right brain way of bringing together things. That's what is happening here. And then what comes out of it is the party, the thought, the word. It is the orientation. That's the seed. That's the sentence, the function, identification of a function. In Marshall McLuhan's terms, it's retrieving something precious from this ground. So this is the ground from which this figure emerges. The richer the ground, the more powerful the figure. And then the next step is actually manifesting, taking the seed idea that you have and building it out, designing it, enhancing it, creating a form based on that function. So you have created, this is the design part. And once you have created this, you have actually changed the world. There is an impact of it. That is the process of breaking out into the world, transforming the world. You are acting, you're displacing what was there before. So this is mostly action, motivated action based on your design, which came from the core of your idea, which came from your openness to experience, your intuitions, your breaking in. And then these actions end up here because you have just changed part of the world, not just yourself, but everybody else. Imagine 8 billion of these things operative as individuals, and then look at different configurations of these. They are all modifying this continuously. So there is continuous opportunity to create new ideas out of this. So there is this cycle going on. You can look at it from OODA loop. You can look at it as Marshall McLuhan. What this book is about is to be engaged in all these 4 disciplines at the same time. Well, it's not exactly at the same time. You can do them one at a time, but you are making sure that you're working on all these 4 fronts. So that's what this book is about. The core idea it is retrieving is the idea of human being as a designer. It is teaching us how to design using all kinds of tools. It is replacing the old analytical ideas and all the things all the problems they cause. And it is inviting us to look at the effects of the design that we have, that we are producing ourselves, so we can continuously keep an eye on whether we are actually achieving our goals or not. So that is a very quick introduction to this diagram. So you're welcome to make any comments or ask any questions. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to comment on anything or ask a question. Joe.
So really quickly, where would the real, the true, and the ideal fall into this?
Very
diagram?
good. Very good. So the true is the verbalized. So that would be in the blue part with thinking. The ideal, your ideal sense is the intuitive sense of what you are seeking. So ideal would fall here. The design is the green one, and there is the real is here, you're transforming the world with it. So that's how I would put it. Ambika, you need to unmute.
You said something a while back, which led me to want to make this comment, but it really connects with what you're saying now too. And I'm just going to use the example of writing, for instance, that writing and then creating anything else is also an evolutionary art and act. So designing is an evolutionary process for us, especially in these times where we are envisioning something different and new.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at writing, right? So for example, my friend Rob, the way he says is that he starts with the intuitive part. So he's a writer, so he will sit down and say, what do I have to say today? Now, this is an open-ended question that is really leveraging all the intuition that he has. He has let everything break in on him, and he's trying to leverage that. What comes out of it is 2 or 3 ideas of saying, maybe I should write about this, maybe I should write about this, maybe I should write about this. So these are the core things that have come. And then he will do some analytical work of saying, which of these has legs? Which of these can I really develop into something really unique and powerful thing that other people would want to read? So that is all analytical thing. Then he works out further in saying, how will I express it? So you're coming up with a detailed structure, like the bullet points, and then you are simply acting out and letting your intuition run. So you're acting it out. You're basically writing the whole thing out. Then you're looking at it and see, does this make sense? And then again, use the analytical functions. These two, the blue and the green, are the figure. These are the grounds. These are the yellow and the red are the ones that you're not that conscious of. These are part of your unconscious, subconscious features largely. This one, the yellow one, is the most away. It's the most, if you want to say ground and figure, this is the ground, and the green is the figure. The blue is ground being transformed into the figure by taking the seed out and then developing it into this. And the red part is the figure acting and getting into the ground. So that's, so the figure and ground is this vertical axis. And the horizontal pieces are the transitions between them. Next up is Kevin. Kevin Ramirez, go ahead.
Okay, hi, Shrikant. I was just my thing about, I guess, the design, or even trying to, input your own design into the world. I gotta say, to me, it's fear that stops me. In a way, I guess, when and this is just because of observing what some designs have led the world to be in the position that we are, I guess, globally, is through the designs that we've come up with. And it's not that people mean to have bad designs or harmful designs, but that the fact that, and again, from what I was putting in the chat was love. The fact that there's such an essence missing in our design, that I guess that makes the design just destructive. And again, just because we wanted to create a source of energy that was abundant, created bombs. Just because we create, you know what I mean? Like as just about anything that we can create can be used to hurt each other. And I think that essence of our design that's missing makes our design just faulty. It's almost like, and again, like I was saying in the chat, being a mother is one of the most important undervalued jobs. I mean, they should be get paid so much money if you're able to plant that seed of love in children, because at the end of the day, children are the future. That's the design to the future. But again, it's like it's my fear to get involved in designing. It's what stops me. And I know something you said before too. Two things that you said before actually about destiny, about that quote, ended with that guy saying, with him saying destiny. And to me, destiny is such a powerful word, because if he's talking about design and destiny, then he's talking about a destiny that's designed already and a past that's designed already. So if we are born into a design world, trying to figure out the design and designing ourselves, it's almost like and this is where I go to the other thing that you said before about how when you tend to think that you know enough or can come to the point you die, when you said that before. But then again, when you know that design is an ongoing circle of life and death, or even being reborn in the same lifetime, it's a circle, an ongoing circle. So it's like you have many opportunities. I think that one of the main questions is the when, the timing. And I know time is, like we're saying, linear, but not so much, like Ambika was saying too. So I mean, and again, I think it's the fear, but I know the fear will go away, and it's just going to be at the right time, because everything, for some reason, it always seems to be happening at the time that it has to happen in order for it to become the design that it's, I guess, proper. So I think that when it's one of the main things for me about the design.
I just want to make sure I understand. You're saying that when is the main thing? Can you elaborate just on that? I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
So it's like when you jump in rope, you have to time it in order for you to be able to get in, that precise moment. And I think sometimes you do it. Sometimes people have come up with designs or written books in a point in their life that is just the right moment. And again, sometimes it's a bad moment, it's a bad timing. But I think there's a way to, it's almost like, and this is where you go to another subject, to have your intuitive self give you that sense of the timing when you can introduce your design so it would fall into the right hands.
So Kevin, I mean, this is very, I mean, you raise really fundamental points. I come at it differently. I mean, I think that I agree that there are terrible designs out there, and the designs, like for example, Louis Sullivan talks about the inverted self, but the consequence of that is that the inverted self produce designs too, and their designs are designed to actually protect the inverted self. So they are all about walls. They are all about suspicion of each other. They're saying that, okay, everything is win-lose, and we will design everything that way. So there are many, many systems. I mean, one of the core insights of Louis Sullivan is that the design is a reflection of the character of the person. So if the building is a reflection of who the person is. The form is the reflection of who the person is. So if at the core of it, and what happens is that there is a lot of bad things in the world. There are lots of bad things in the world. There are lots of bad people in the world. And there is a lot of bad design in the world. And it is we are very odd creatures because we are swimming in that design. We don't have a choice. It's all around us and it affects us whether we like it or not. So we are swimming in the designs that have been created by a whole range of people with all kinds of different things. But at the same time, I think it is urgently important for each one of us to find a space where we design the way we think we should design, whether it be in the privacy of your own home, your own mind, with people that you trust. And that experience, that core approach to actually exercising your ability to design, in the long run is very powerful. And in the long run, no matter how bad everything is, we did a meetup on The Man's Search of Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And this is a gentleman who is living through the concentration camp. And he still manages to preserve his soul in the midst of all of that and helps people around him do the same to the extent to which he can. And so human being is pretty resilient. And you can see that in children. Children can actually survive in quite, they're amazing creatures. And that's what we are at the core. And no matter what the surroundings are and how much negative they are, we need to do what we can to whatever scale, whatever context, in order to preserve our ability to design, because that is the core of who we are as human beings. But thank you very much, Kevin. I don't know whether this is useful or relevant, but this is all I can think of.
I agree. No, I agree with what you said, especially about the children part. I've if anything, most of my salvation has come from observing kids, my children, and just seeing, like you were saying, the nature of and that lady that left, she mentioned that how children were able to just instinctively fix that the path of the water without having any thoughts or finding a design for it. It was just something natural, and that's what happens. That I've come to do the things I've actually have to kind of like retrace my steps and do the same things that I did when I was a kid. Like I was just talking to somebody before, like, when was the last time when was the last time you hugged the tree?
Mm-hmm.
And then the impact that it had on me because of my daughter doing it and I did it.
Yes.
It was, I couldn't believe what I was doing and how it felt. So I do agree that there are ways, but again, just like you said before.
May I say something, Kevin?
Yes.
See, I think that having a child is your opportunity of being reborn again. It's everybody's opportunity, because because you can see like the seed of life. The life is all there, and they have everything. They are not encumbered by all the problems that you are encumbered by, and they are looking at life fresh, and you can learn from them how to operate. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yes, I don't think it's the how though. I think it's still the when, because you said before this is urgent, but if you ask a kid what's urgent for them in their lives, they're gonna be like, what is urgent? So again, if we let go of this this factor of time, and then let the when be a destiny, not the fact that it has to be at a certain time and place, more like it has to happen because the universe tends to unfold as it should. So it's a destiny already, not written, but kind of written, I guess. But see, that's what I'm saying. Like when he said destiny, to me, that was pretty deep because he's talking about something that he already knew, you know?
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate that. Next up is Joe, Jang, Charlie, and Ambika. Joe.
So my question will be very quick, and it kind of feels almost inappropriate after like that such a deep discussion. But
Go ahead, Joe. You can ask an
I do
inappropriate
need.
question.
All right. It's so principles would actually fall within the diagram within the intuition, observe, and overextend, correct? And then,
no, the principles would fall within the blue part, the function thinking. This is because principles are explicit. The yellow is implicit. It is something, it is the explicit principles that are guiding you. Those are like the seed from which you're going to build the design of your life.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I should actually had that. That was the one but then where do norms and values?
That's a very good question. Give me a second. This is not working. It keeps getting lost. So that's a very good question. So norms and values are first experienced in the yellow. They are kind of at the edge of your consciousness of saying that this is what I really need. And you actually see that many times as a consequence of what has happened. And you're saying, this is what I need. So that the need for that, the final cause, it comes from that. It's like an intuition of something that you need. And then you need to actually put it and explicate it. And once you have explicated it, it becomes part of the blue, which is kind of thinking, principles, explication, the seed, which is going to then serve as a designing principle for your life.
Okay. And then it goes to the real.
And then based on that design, you're going to act.
Right.
And in the process, you're going to displace many things. And then you're going to reflect on what you've done in order to come up with formulation of what you need to do next.
Okay. Despite my hiccup with principles, I actually got most of them.
Wonderful.
All right. So cool.
Excellent. Next up is Jeng. Jeng.
Okay. I want to chime in about I'm not sure I get it about the time. Actually, I think there's never a perfect timing. My experience with design is, for example, there's never a perfect timing to have kids. You're never ready. my experience, just do it. Whatever you're in the right direction, there's never a perfect timing to roll out a product, never a perfect timing to do your marketing. So whatever you want to do, there's never a perfect timing. You are never ready. Just jump into it, then you will be ready along the way. So that's what I want to say. So
no, I fully agree with that. There is a Sanskrit saying called, it says Shubhasya Shigram. That means for all good things you want to do, the earlier you do it, the more auspicious is it. Don't wait. There is no like a auspicious time. And my general approach is to do as many things as you possibly can, because what happens is that you don't know which of them is going to succeed anyway. And the faster you get on the path of doing things, you start to get feedback, because like most people spend a lot of time. Again, okay, this is my personal, the way in which my mind works. Okay, I think there are, there are many different ways of doing things, but I'm very much of this kind of loop kind of a person of saying, try out many things and use the feedback. Partly because I don't mind failures that much. I think, yeah, sure, of course you fail. When you try many things, of course you're going to fail. But that's the only way I know of learning. Okay, but that's my style. Next up is Charlie.
Yeah, I wanted to mention something about children because I think of them as my own tribe. They're the ones I get along with best and who seem to understand me best. But there's a guy named Ken Robinson in England, Sir Ken Robinson, and he's a really big advocate of bringing creativity back into the schools. And he mentioned that there's been studies that have shown that children across the board, okay, are geniuses at creativity. And that by the time they get through the school system and they graduate from high school, it's only like about 2% that qualify as creative geniuses. And so it's like it's stomped out of them. And I think one of the things, speaking of the Jungian what do you call thinking types, or what's the how you describe those categories?
It's called psychological types, or psychological types.
Well, yeah, I mean the thinking and the feeling and the
yes, those are psychological functions. Yeah.
Functions. Okay, there we go. But the thing is that a lot of people might make the mistake of thinking that you have to be an N type. You have to be EN or IN or whatever. In order to be creative. But those children, they're all over the board. They have all these different personalities, and that everybody has the potential to be creative. Everybody has the potential to be a designer. And so it's I think that one of the most important things that people can do now is to redesign the school system, because right now it's based upon grades. And I was a substitute teacher for 10 years during the 90s, and I saw it up close and personal. Okay, like I said, I get along really well with kids. Kids open up to me. They tell me what their feelings are and stuff. And it's there was a study that was done in Sweden not too long ago that showed that one of the primary causes for suicide amongst children is of shame over grades. And John Dewey had an education system where there was no grades. Okay, you don't have to have grades. You don't have to be competing with other people. You don't have to have the right answer. You can experiment and try and that sort of a thing. And that person who was your friend, I guess she's not still here, but she was into a school system, Montessori.
Yeah, Montessori. It's very powerful. It's basically the Montessori turns education on its head. It holds that the child is an independent being capable of learning, and all the teachers need to do is to create a welcoming environment for the child to learn, and then stand on the side, watching very carefully, helping when needed. It's like a plant. It has its own ability to grow. You just give it what it needs, the water and the soil, and then it just grows.
Yeah, and it help when needed. Also
help when needed.
In other words, help is there. You want it, you got it. Okay,
right.
That kind of thing.
But the core point is that the initiative is within the child. Exactly. And what happens is that I fully agree. I mean, the education system is designed to kill that initiative. It's just horrendous. Next up is Ambika.
Sorry about that. So this just gets more and more amazing and fascinating. And I was looking at your diagram, Shrikant, and I just wanted to offer you.
Oh, wonderful.
This. You said this was the ground, and so the root coming from the tree up, and
beautiful
aspects of that one, and of course this would apply to education and creativity and design. So I just thought
that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
And I wanted to say one thing about fathers and mothers, because this has come up in today's discussion. It came up last Saturday as well. And I actually, having taught students 18 to 35, 40 years, and a lot of young men, and I actually think they've been given a raw deal with all of this other stuff going on. And often I would see my young male students really more lost and in pain than my female students because of all the women's lib thing. They think they can do whatever they like. and it would really be the male students who would reach out. And I just want to do a shout out for all of you guys all over the world, because you need to be seen for the strengths that you bring to the world. And I really want to say that for all of you today, and Kevin as well, because he's a young dad. You know, there is so much focus on what the mother brings, but people forget what the father brings too. And we can forget some of those things while we're in it. So a shout out for all of you at all stages of your life. Thank you so much for what you're doing and what you will continue to do to take care of children and human beings. And we are all part of that drama. And particularly today with so much happening with, you know, trafficking. So we do need to create new systems, and we do need to appreciate each other more than we ever do. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ambika. Excellent. Folks, this was an amazing discussion. And what we will do is that on Thursdays, we will have discussions like this. So on Mondays, we are going to keep moving forward on the book. So the topic this Monday is going to be the ultimate particular. And what we are doing is that we are actually following this diagram in order to, I don't know what's going on. Give me a second. Let me just go ahead and bring up the diagram. So I'm going to tell you which chapters we are studying next. Let's see. Yeah, there it is. So we just finished we started out with the first chapter of the first tradition. Okay, so we started, and that is the notion here. So that's what we did first. Okay, then we jumped to chapter 9, which was composing and connecting, which was way of designing, developing our skills. Okay, next we are going to go here is one of the crucial concepts that he's replacing. And the concept that he's using to replace this concept is called the ultimate particular. What happens is that today's culture is materialistic, that focuses either too much on the material stuff itself, just because it is there, or it tends to have, and it tends not or, but and it tends to have ideas which are disconnected from real things. Ultimate particular is a union of the ideal and the real. And that's what this idea is going to be on. Okay. The next one after that, we have to go into this area. And the concept that I've chosen for that is desiderata. Though it appears in the third section, it is really about the values, about saying, what are your values? What really are your values? And that's what we are going to do after. So ultimate particular followed by desiderata. And that will complete our first cycle. And we will start off the next cycle after that. So it's going to be ultimate particular followed by this. The other thing I want to encourage you to do is to go ahead and read the book in whatever order you want. And this is Thursdays is when you can come and talk about what you're learning, no matter what chapters you're working on, etc. All right, folks, thank you very much. We will see you soon.